The rain fell in slow, icy sheets over downtown Manhattan, turning the glowing streets into rivers of blurred lights and broken reflections while people rushed beneath black umbrellas without ever looking at the faces around them, and near the corner of 57th Street, where luxury cars lined up outside, a towering glass hotel that smelled of expensive perfume and polished marble, a thin teenage boy sat quietly beside a cracked stone wall with an old wooden chessboard resting across his lap, his hoodie soaked from the storm, his shoes torn open at the front, and his fingers trembling slightly from the cold as he stared down at the board like it was the only thing in the world still speaking to him. Most people ignored him. Some looked at him with pity. Others looked away because it was easier. But the boy never begged. He never called out. He simply waited. And every now and then, when someone curious stopped to play against him for a few dollars, they usually walked away stunned, confused, and strangely emotional after losing in less than 10 minutes to a homeless kid who spoke like an old professor and played chess like a machine built from pain itself. That night, a black luxury sedan rolled slowly toward the hotel entrance while cameras flashed nearby, because one of the richest men in the city had just arrived for a private charity gala that celebrated hope for the underprivileged, a phrase printed in gold letters across giant banners, hanging above the entrance while homeless people were quietly pushed farther down the sidewalk by security guards so donors would not feel uncomfortable during dinner. Inside the car sat Victor Langston, CEO of Langston Financial Group, a man worth billions, famous for his sharp mind, cold decisions, and carefully rehearsed smile that appeared on magazine covers, beside headlines calling him a visionary genius. But the people who worked under him used different words. Heartless, cruel, untouchable. Victor adjusted the cuff of his expensive suit and glanced toward the rain-covered window with tired irritation, already annoyed by the flashing cameras waiting outside. Then he noticed the boy, the chessboard, the strange stillness in his eyes. Victor frowned slightly. "Why is that kid sitting there?" he asked. His driver looked over briefly. "Homeless, sir. Been around this block for months." Victor watched as a businessman stopped to play the boy, sat for barely 3 minutes, then stood up angrily before throwing two $20 bills onto the board and walking away humiliated. The boy did not react. He simply reset the pieces. Victor narrowed his eyes. "Interesting." The driver laughed quietly. Street hustler probably memorized tricks from the internet. But Victor kept staring, because there was something unsettling about the way the boy moved. No panic, no desperation, only patience, the kind of patience Victor had once seen years ago, when he faced international grandmasters during private tournaments arranged for wealthy elites. Victor used to love chess before business poisoned everything inside him, before winning became more important than people, before his own daughter stopped speaking to him. Without fully understanding why, Victor suddenly opened the car door and stepped out into the rain. Security immediately surrounded him. "Sir, the event—" "5 minutes," Victor said coldly. The cameras exploded with flashes as Victor Langston walked across the wet sidewalk toward the homeless boy, and nearby reporters instantly began whispering excitedly because billionaires did not usually stop to talk to homeless teenagers unless there were cameras nearby. But Victor barely noticed them. The boy finally looked up. His face was younger than Victor expected, maybe 16. Dark circles rested beneath tired eyes that looked far older than they should have. Water dripped from his hair onto the chessboard. Victor stopped in front of him. "You play for money?" he asked. The boy nodded once. "How much?" "Whatever people think the lesson is worth." Victor almost smiled. "That confident?" The boy calmly adjusted a knight. Confidence loses games. Observation wins them. One of the security guards snorted quietly. Victor stared harder. "What's your name?" "Elijah." "No last name?" Elijah's eyes lowered toward the board again. "Not anymore." Something about the answer lingered strangely in the cold air between them. Victor pulled out his wallet and placed a $100 bill beside the board. "One game?" People nearby slowed down to watch. Phones came out. Even hotel staff leaned toward the windows. Elijah looked at the bill but did not touch it. "White or black?" he asked. Victor sat down across from him beneath the rain. "White." The game began. At first, Victor played casually, almost amused, expecting quick tricks or flashy moves from a teenager trying to impress strangers. But after only 6 turns, the amusement faded from his face.
Completely, because the boy's strategy was terrifyingly precise, every move carrying invisible pressure, like a slowly tightening rope around Victor's throat. The sounds of rain seemed to disappear. Victor leaned forward. The boy remained calm, move after move. Victor felt himself being cornered in ways he had not experienced in years. By turn 14, sweat formed near his temple despite the cold weather. By turn 18, the small crowd surrounding them had gone completely silent. And by turn 21, Victor realized something impossible. He was losing. Badly. Victor stared at the board in disbelief. Who taught you this? Elijah's fingers rested lightly on a bishop. My father. Was he a master? A faint shadow crossed the boy's face. He was many things. Victor tried recovering the game. But every aggressive move only pushed him deeper into a trap, already designed long before he noticed it. Finally, Elijah moved his queen quietly across the board. Checkmate. Silence. Even the rain felt quieter. Victor stared at the board for several seconds without speaking, while humiliation burned slowly beneath his skin. Because he had just been dismantled in front of reporters, hotel guests, and half his security team by a homeless teenager wearing broken shoes. But strangely, he did not feel angry. He felt awake. More awake than he had in years. Victor slowly leaned back. What shelter are you staying in? Elijah looked surprised by the question. I move around. That means nowhere. The boy said nothing. Victor stood up slowly and adjusted his coat. Come inside. The crowd immediately began whispering. Elijah frowned. Why? Victor looked down at the chessboard. Because I want a rematch. Inside the hotel ballroom, golden chandeliers sparkled above wealthy donors, drinking champagne while violin music floated softly through the air. But the atmosphere changed instantly when Victor Langston entered with a homeless teenager beside him. Conversations stopped. Judgment spread silently across expensive faces. Women in diamonds stared with discomfort. Executives exchanged confused looks. Victor ignored all of them. Elijah, he said calmly, welcome to the most dishonest room in New York. Elijah looked around carefully. The giant hall glittered with wealth. So extreme it almost felt unreal, compared to the freezing sidewalks outside. Servers carried trays of food worth more than Elijah probably ate in a month. And directly above the stage hung a giant screen, displaying smiling photos of poor families, supposedly helped by the charity event. Elijah studied the screen quietly. Then he asked something unexpected. Do they know their pictures are being used? Victor glanced toward him sharply.
What?
The families, Elijah said softly. Do they know rich people are eating steak under their faces tonight? Victor said nothing, because the truth was, he had no idea. A woman suddenly approached them with an elegant smile stretched tightly across her face. Victor, she said carefully, the board members are waiting. Her eyes briefly flicked toward Elijah with visible discomfort. Victor noticed. This is Elijah, he said. The woman forced a polite smile. Of course. But Elijah already understood the look. He had seen it his whole life. The look people gave when they wanted someone invisible. Victor turned toward the ballroom. Walk with me. As they moved through the crowd, people whispered behind champagne glasses while pretending not to stare. But Elijah kept his head high despite wearing soaked clothes, among millionaires in tuxedos. And for reasons Victor could not explain, that quiet dignity unsettled him more than any insult ever had. Eventually they reached a private lounge overlooking the city skyline, where the noise of the gala became distant and muted behind glass walls. Victor poured himself a drink. You're not what I expected. Elijah sat near the window. Neither are you. Victor raised an eyebrow. You know who I am? Everyone does. And what do you think? Elijah looked out over the rain-covered city before answering. I think people become dangerous when they forget what suffering looks like. Victor's jaw tightened slightly. That sounds rehearsed. No, Elijah replied softly. Just observed. For a moment neither spoke. Then Victor suddenly asked, Where are your parents? The question hung heavily in the room. Elijah's eyes lowered. My mother died 3 years ago. And your father? A long silence followed. Finally, Elijah answered quietly. He disappeared. Victor nodded slowly. Something about the boy's voice carried real grief beneath the calmness. Not performance. Not manipulation. Real pain. Victor took another sip of whiskey. You're intelligent enough for scholarships. Why stay on the streets? Elijah's expression darkened slightly. Because smart people still need money to survive. Victor frowned. That makes no sense. It does when your guardian steals your documents and sells your apartment after your mother dies. Victor froze slightly.
What?
Elijah finally looked directly at him. My uncle took everything. Said nobody would believe a kid over an adult. He paused quietly. Turns out he was right. Victor stared at the boy without speaking. Because suddenly, this no longer felt like a random encounter. It felt personal, painfully personal. He remembered his own daughter accusing him years ago of caring more about profits than people. He remembered ignoring her tears because meetings mattered more. He remembered the night she left home. And for the first time in a very long time, guilt moved inside him like broken glass. A knock interrupted the silence. One of Victor's assistants stepped inside nervously. Sir, the media is asking questions about the homeless boy. Victor's expression hardened instantly. Tell them nothing. The assistant hesitated. There's also another issue. What issue? The board discovered someone leaked internal documents this morning. Victor's face darkened immediately. What documents? The assistant swallowed nervously. Evidence connected to the housing redevelopment project. Elijah looked up slightly. Victor's voice turned icy. Who leaked them? We don't know yet, sir. The assistant handed Victor a tablet. Victor began reading, and as his eyes moved across the screen, the color slowly drained from his face. Elijah noticed immediately. What happened? Victor looked toward the rain outside. For the first time in years, he looked afraid. The city is opening an investigation, he whispered. Elijah frowned slightly. Into what? Victor stared silently at the tablet before answering. Into me. And at that exact moment, downstairs in the ballroom, several police officers quietly entered the building while reporters outside suddenly exploded into chaos, beneath flashing cameras and storming rain, because somewhere, deep within the thousands of leaked files, was evidence that one of the city's most respected billionaires had built his empire by secretly forcing hundreds of poor families out of their homes through illegal intimidation, bribery and fraud, including one small apartment building, the same building Elijah's family once lived in before everything was destroyed. And neither of them yet understood just how deeply their lives had always been connected. The sound of shouting rose faintly from the ballroom below, like distant thunder, blending with the storm outside while Victor Langston stood frozen beside the glass wall, his hand tightening around the tablet so hard his knuckles turned white. And across the room Elijah watched him carefully, sensing something shift beneath the billionaire's perfectly controlled exterior, because men like Victor usually looked untouchable. The kind of people who smiled through scandals and buried fear beneath expensive confidence. But this was different. This looked like a man staring directly at ghosts. He thought money had already buried forever. The assistant's voice trembled slightly. Sir, reporters are saying more files may still be released tonight. Victor barely heard him. His eyes remained locked on one document. A property acquisition report from 8 years earlier. A building demolition order signed with his authorization. And near the bottom of the page was an address he recognized instantly because he had seen it only minutes ago. While reviewing Elijah's emergency shelter history attached to a background search, his security team had quietly prepared after bringing the boy inside. Same building, same address. Victor slowly looked toward Elijah. How long ago did your family lose the apartment? Elijah frowned slightly at the strange question. About 8 years. Victor's stomach tightened painfully. What was the address? Elijah answered, and the room fell silent, because it was the exact same address printed on the document, shaking in Victor's hands. For several long seconds, neither man spoke. Rain hammered harder against the windows. Somewhere below them, cameras flashed wildly as journalists fought security guards near the hotel entrance. But inside the lounge, the world suddenly felt small and suffocating. Victor lowered the tablet slowly. Elijah, he said carefully. Your building was part of a redevelopment project. Elijah's face hardened slightly. I know. Victor swallowed. There were legal disputes. Elijah gave a quiet, bitter laugh that sounded far too old for someone his age. That's what rich people call it. Victor flinched. Because the boy was right. That was exactly what they called it. Legal disputes, market corrections, necessary restructuring, words polished clean enough to hide suffering underneath them. Victor walked toward the window slowly. I didn't know families were being threatened. But they were. Victor closed his eyes briefly. He remembered those years clearly now. Aggressive expansion, entire neighborhoods purchased and demolished. Lawyers handling complaints before they ever reached him. At the time, he convinced himself he was building progress, opportunity, growth. But growth for who? Certainly not for families like Elijah's. Elijah, Victor said quietly, what happened to your father after the eviction? The boy's expression changed immediately. Pain moved across his face like a shadow. He tried fighting it. Victor turned slowly. What do you mean? He collected evidence, Elijah whispered. He said people inside the company were breaking laws and bribing officials. His jaw tightened. Then one night he disappeared. The room went cold. Victor stared at him carefully now. Did the police investigate? They said he probably abandoned us. Elijah looked down at the chessboard bag beside his chair. But my father would never leave me. Victor felt something dark twist inside his chest. Because suddenly this no longer looked like corporate corruption. It looked like something far worse. Another knock interrupted the silence before Victor could respond. But this time the doors burst open violently and two men in expensive suits entered, alongside a nervous security guard. Board members. Victor recognized the anger immediately. The taller man stepped forward first. Victor, we need to talk now. His eyes briefly landed on Elijah with obvious irritation. Victor's voice turned cold again. Leave us. This concerns the company. It concerns me more. The second man slammed a folder onto the table. The investigation unit already froze 3 offshore accounts. Victor's expression remained unreadable. And if you don't contain this immediately, we all go down. Elijah watched silently from the corner while tension thickened through the room. The taller executive lowered his voice sharply. You need to control the narrative before prosecutors connect the relocation program to the disappearances. Victor froze. Elijah looked up instantly. Disappearances? The executive realized his mistake too late. Victor stepped toward him slowly. What disappearances? Victor! What disappearances? The man hesitated, and that hesitation told Victor everything. His voice became dangerously quiet. How much was hidden from me? The board members exchanged nervous glances. Finally, the second man spoke. Some residents fought the project harder than expected, he muttered. Victor's face darkened. Answer clearly. There were intimidation operations. Elijah stood slowly now. Victor's breathing became heavier. Operations run by who? The taller executive snapped back defensively. You approved aggressive acquisition tactics. I approved legal pressure. The room exploded into silence. And then Elijah asked the question nobody wanted to answer. What happened to my father? No one spoke. The boy's voice cracked slightly this time, despite all his calm control. What happened to him? Victor turned toward the executives with growing horror. The taller man finally muttered, there was an incident. Victor felt sick. What incident? The executive rubbed his forehead nervously. Your father discovered financial transfers linked to city officials, he said quietly toward Elijah. He threatened to expose everything. Elijah stared without blinking. And? There was a confrontation. Victor stepped forward furiously. What confrontation? The second executive finally exploded. Your security contractors handled it, Victor. We told you years ago those men were dangerous. Victor looked genuinely shaken now, because he remembered those contractors. Private operators hired unofficially through layers of legal separation. Men used to pressure tenants into leaving properties faster. Victor never asked questions because results kept coming. Money kept growing. And now a homeless boy was standing in front of him, asking where his father disappeared to. The taller executive lowered his voice again. We don't know exactly what happened after they took him. Elijah's face lost all color. Took him? Nobody answered. The silence itself became the answer. For a moment, Elijah simply stood there motionless while rain battered the windows behind him, and Victor saw something heartbreaking happen in the boy's eyes. because hope was collapsing inside them in real time. The tiny, fragile hope that his father might still be alive somewhere. And watching that pain felt unbearable in a way Victor had never experienced before, despite all the suffering his business decisions had caused over the years. Elijah picked up his chessboard slowly. "I should go." Victor stepped toward him immediately. "Wait." "Why?" Elijah whispered without looking up. "So another rich man can explain why none of this is technically his fault." Victor had no answer, because for the first time in his life, excuses sounded disgusting even inside his own head. "Elijah!" The boy finally looked at him again, and his eyes now carried a quiet devastation, so deep it almost made Victor unable to breathe. "My father spent years trying to protect families your company destroyed," he said softly. "And now you're telling me he vanished because powerful people wanted silence." Victor opened his mouth, but Elijah continued. "You know what the worst part is?" Victor said nothing. Elijah's voice trembled slightly. "I still believed people like you could change." Then he walked toward the door. Victor instinctively grabbed his arm, and Elijah suddenly snapped. Years of pain exploded out of him all at once. "Don't touch me!" he shouted. The room fell silent. Tears burned in the boy's eyes now, though he fought desperately to hide them. "You sat upstairs drinking champagne while people froze outside your buildings," he said. "You built towers over families like mine and never once looked down long enough to see us." Victor released him slowly. Every word hit like a knife because they were true. All of them. Elijah stepped backward toward the door. But before leaving, he said one final thing. "My father used to tell me chess reveals who people really are, because eventually every player sacrifices something important to win." His voice broke slightly. "I think you sacrificed your soul a long time ago." Then he disappeared into the storm. Victor stood motionless long after the door closed. The executives immediately started talking again. "We need damage control. Lawyers are already drafting statements. We can still contain this if—" "Get out," Victor said quietly. Neither man moved. Victor looked at them with terrifying calmness. "Get out!" They left immediately. And for the first time in decades, Victor Langston found himself completely alone with the truth. Hours later, the city remained drenched in rain, while police investigations spread across news channels and reporters crowded outside. Langston Financial Headquarters, like vultures circling wounded prey. But Victor no longer cared about stock prices or media. Strategy, because something inside him had finally broken open beyond repair. He sat alone in his office, staring at old project files until sunrise. Family eviction records, threat reports, private contractor invoices, destroyed lives hidden beneath business language. And among hundreds of names, one file kept pulling his eyes back again and again. Daniel Reyes, Elijah's father. Attached to the file was a final incident report marked confidential. Victor opened it slowly. Then his face went pale, because according to the report, Daniel Reyes was not killed. He was arrested secretly after being framed for financial crimes connected to the redevelopment. Investigation. The contractors had buried him inside a private detention arrangement overseas, through corrupt officials who ensured he disappeared. The wind moved softly around them, and after a long silence, Elijah slowly reset the fallen chess pieces between them. "One more game?" he asked quietly. Victor almost smiled through exhausted eyes. "In this condition, you'll destroy me again." Elijah shook his head gently. "That's not why people play chess." Victor looked at him carefully. "Then why?" Elijah stared down at the board. "Because every game gives you a chance to make better moves than before." For a moment, Victor could not speak. Because somehow, after everything, the homeless boy he once saw as entertainment had given him, the one thing money never could, a second chance to become human again. And beneath the cold lights of the sleeping city, beside a cracked chessboard under an old bridge, where two completely different lives had collided through pain, corruption, and truth, the billionaire and the homeless prodigy quietly began another game. While dawn slowly rose over New York, carrying with it the fragile but beautiful reminder that no matter how badly someone loses their way, redemption only begins the moment They finally choose to see the people suffering right in front of them,